listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. Find out all the different locations where you can hear this show in its audio format. Or you can come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast, and join probably the best part of the YouTube stream, and that is the live chat room going on during the show, starting up right now as you're listening or watching this show. And that's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And as I've said before, you can find all the archives to every one of my shows that have broadcast on the Odyssey Radio Network over the last year plus. And they're all down. There's almost 300 videos down there. And it has all the live chats are part of those video streams when you watch them. However, you can no longer contribute to the live chat, as it's just a recording of the live chat as it was done during the live broadcast of the show. So come on over, watch the archives, listen to tonight's show. There's probably lots of images I could put up for tonight's show, but I'm probably not going to do that either. So it's just watching me talk, but joining the live chat room. So come on over either way to Odyssey or to YouTube and see what's going on. And folks, I want to start off tonight by just mentioning something that I saw in my social media, my Facebook stream this morning. There was somebody who put up somebody else's post, and they've got a snapshot of it. And in that post are all these circled and color-coded things. And somebody said this: if you're a Christian and can't hear Black Lives Matter without feeling the need to respond with a criticism that all lives matter, then crack open your Bible and hit up Luke 15. So I thought, and there's more here to this, so I thought, what is Luke 15 about? So I opened it up. But in this post, it went on to say, don't have it handy? Let me summarize Luke 15 for you. There are 100 sheep, but one goes missing. Jesus leaves the 99 and goes after the one. The 99 say, but what about us? Don't we matter? Of course the 99 still matter, but they're not the ones in danger. The one is. And then he says, I'll say it again, Black Lives Matter. Now that was the post. And I said, I look at that and I cringe when people use biblical passages to try to sustain political agendas, especially when the original biblical passage has absolutely no application in its context. And so I said, that's a pretty broad, I responded to my friend who reposted this. I said, that's a pretty broad interpretation of that passage, Luke 15. What was the context? And I said, for context, it's important when quoting Scripture. Here's the parable of the lost sheep from Luke 15. Now here's what the actual passage says. It says this, from Luke 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Then Jesus told this parable in response to that. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep. Then Jesus goes on to say, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. My friend responded, I don't see any conflict in the point being made. And I said, I'm not trying to be deliberately obtuse, but could you explain to me and us how this parable in its context can be applied to support for BLM? Somebody else said, let's see, how can I twist this Bible verse to fit my anti-BLM right-wing agenda? And I responded simply, I think it's more an issue of using a biblical passage completely out of its context to support BLM. The passage in support of BLM are completely incongruent, unless you're saying that BLM is in the business of seeking out lost souls and bringing them to God. Now, that's something, I've cringed at this, and I've talked about other passages I've seen people use before. I remember years ago hearing the Reverend Jesse Jackson speaking about, at Christmas time, about Joseph and Mary, and she's very pregnant, and they're looking for a hotel or a place to stay, and there's no place for them. And Jackson refers to them as the lost, the poor, the outcast. They're impoverished. They have no money until somebody takes them in. And I said, that is a gross distortion of the Bible story. Whether you believe it's true or not. In the story, Joseph is a manual laborer. He's a carpenter. He's a stonemason. They have to go back to the city where they came from for a census to be taken by the Roman government. And so they go. Mary's very pregnant, according to the story. And you know what? Other people are gathering at Bethlehem, too, where they came from. It's about 6-7 miles outside of Jerusalem. So it's like an urban suburb of Jerusalem. Or a rural suburb, of Jerusalem. And so they come back to take the census, and the inns are full. There is no room for anybody. It's also around Passover time. And at Passover time, the inns around Jerusalem and all the little settlements and the villages got packed full. And so he's looking for a place to stay. They didn't have kayak or some other online service to help line up their hotel rooms ahead of time. So they're out, and they go out, and there's no place to stay. Everything's full up. And the innkeeper finally says, hey, look, I got a stable out back, which is connected to his family house. And he says, you can come to the stable and you can stay there. I'm sure he charged them something. It wasn't that Joseph and Mary were poor or impoverished. It's that they were at a place that was overcrowded. They needed a place to stay. She's going to give birth, and he's got no rooms available anywhere. And so he does find a place to stay. And I assure you, he probably paid something to the innkeeper for helping them out. They were not impoverished. Same thing with this parable of the lost sheep. This is a parable that Jesus is giving of saying, look, I'm here to save the lost. How does that apply to Black Lives Matter? How is somebody saying that, remember, let's go back to that. If you're a Christian and can't hear Black Lives Matter without feeling the need to respond with a criticism that all lives matter, then crack open your Bible and hit up. And then he says the 100 sheep, one's lost, Jesus goes, and they celebrate over the lost sheep. And he leaves the 99 in the fold. Now, how is that congruent? How can you make that passage apply to the mission statement or belief in the mission statement of Black Lives Matter? Let's leave whether the issue is one you agree with or not, whether you like Black Lives Matter or not, whether you're right or left or anything in between. You can take that and remove that out of the picture for a moment. What we like or dislike about Black Lives Matter is not what is at question. It's does that biblical passage, can that be used in the broadest of senses to say that Jesus came to seek the lost ones, and that he did rather bring the one lost one into the fold, rather than the 99 who are already safe. And then he even makes, at the end, Jesus even makes the statement, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. So he's saying the 99 are already saved. They've already repented of their sin. I'm going to find the one who hasn't repented of his sin. I'm going to go find that lost soul and bring him into God's fold. Now, if I'm missing something, if I'm being obtuse here, and I'm not getting the point, if you know what the application is that can be made, please let me know. So when you say all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter, is he just trying to say that Black Lives Matter is like the lost sheep? That everybody else has protection, but black community doesn't? It doesn't fit either. It doesn't work. So this parable doesn't work for that. It's not a big issue. The only issue I'm addressing when I take that whole story and set it aside is that using a biblical passage to support whatever your political narrative or political agenda might be is pretty dangerous ground if you don't understand the context of the passage. The passage in the parable of the lost sheep is about Jesus, the Son of God, looking for the lost souls, coming and preaching. He said in another way, he said it's those who are well don't need a physician. It's the sick ones who need a physician. Could we apply that to Black Lives Matter in the same way? It's the sick people who need the physician. So anyway, that's a point I'm making because it's just fresh off the presses in my mind. And this is something where there is, when you try to make an agenda and a narrative stick, and you try to do it using a biblical passage, thinking you're appealing to, or at least insulting, Christianity or people who believe in that religious book, that religious writing, when you're using that writing and it doesn't fit in its context, it doesn't really work. So that's all I have to say about that. If you've got an answer to that for me that I'm missing, go ahead and put it in the chat room, put it in the comments below this video, or write me. Shoot me an email. Let me know what you think. And that's all on that. I want to talk about a different topic today, as you could tell by the title of the show. I wanted to get back a little bit into some of the things I've written about with John Ward. I do have the book here. I might as well show this off. This book, and hopefully I won't get a crazy reflection off of the title here, so I'm going to kind of look. John Ward and I wrote this book a few years ago, The Exodus Reality, and it's all about the Exodus and the historical Moses and so on. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Now, along with this theme, I kind of wanted to break into a couple of things, and I've got a lot of information. So you know what? Probably not going to hit it all tonight. So we may spread this over a day or two to see what it's all about. But what I wanted to talk about was something kind of interesting, a little different take on the Exodus. And that's when you look at the Exodus and you look at the Passover, which took place at the Exodus and has been celebrated for thousands of years since by the Jewish people, and that's Passover. Did you know that there are these hidden magical themes inside the Exodus and inside the Passover? I'm kind of calling this Passover magic. And if you look at Passover, it was celebrating what? Remember the 10 plagues, and the last plague, God finally sends the angel of death, and it takes all the firstborn of everybody in Egypt to prove God's power. Now, you can believe that on a spiritual level or not. That is the way the account is told to us of the great Exodus under Moses. And what did they have to do? This angel of death wasn't just focused on the Egyptians. It was going to take everybody, every firstborn of every family. And unless you did one thing, you had to take the blood of a lamb and take a piece of hyssop, clipped off of a plant of hyssop, and you had to dip it in the blood and put it over the lintel and the side frames of your door. And that blood would show that the angel of death was to pass over you. Hence the word Passover. And so this has been celebrated for years. Right around the same time we have Easter, and is the Jewish holiday of Passover. And millions of people around the world will experience the traditional Seder meal. They remember an event from thousands of years ago while they're doing this. I know now they also they put at the Passover meal, and I've got Jewish family and Jewish friends who do this. At the Passover meal, they always set an empty place, an empty plate, an empty place setting at the meal. And they also talk about next year in Jerusalem, meaning it's going to be the return of us to our homeland and so on. And they set that empty plate for the missing one, the Messiah, the coming Messiah. And so the Passover event was founded a long time ago at the end of the 10 plagues, just prior to and it's what ushered in the great Exodus, this event. And imbued throughout the Passover tale is an undeniable sense of magic. Moses and his brother Aaron engage in contests of magic with the priests of Pharaoh. They turn the Nile into blood. They blot out the sun. They bring all these terrible plagues like lice and flies and locusts, the heavens raining down fire and brimstone. And by the way, that's not the eruption of Santorini. This is supposed to be a miraculous event. Whether it actually happened, we don't know, but this is what's in the story. And Moses even conjures up the power of God with his staff in order to part the waters of the Red Sea. As they're leaving Egypt, about a week later, or a few days later, they come to the Red Sea. And he uses the staff, and it brings up the power of God, and it says, a strong east wind blew all night and parted the waters, and they crossed as if on dry ground. And then he passes the rod over the waters again, and it closes it up on the pursuing Egyptian army and drowns them. And so these are the events that we're talking about. Now, the word Passover comes from the Hebrew word Pesach, which most scholars believe, if I'm pronouncing that right, believe means protection. It refers to the passing over or the protection of the Israelite homes against the angel of the Lord during the last plague. And that's the plague of the death of the firstborn of Egypt. And during the plague, Moses commanded his people to spread the blood, on the doorposts and the lintels and the doorframes of their homes, to mark them as being apart and separate, and to be protected from God's angel of death. And you can find that account in Exodus chapter 12. And it says, and on that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and I will see the blood, and I will pass over you. And that is from the passage in Exodus. Now, recently, some scholarly consensus seems to be shifting back toward the view that the Passover and the Exodus were, in fact, real historical events. And I want to put a big duh after that. These events took place. These are things that happened. History is starting to unfold and reveal its secrets. Where once we used to believe these stories without having a lot of proof behind them, nowadays, especially in recent decades, we've really been seeking to find the facts behind these stories. That's why I wrote a book with John Ward on the historical Moses. Did this guy actually exist? Because we want to know these things. We don't want to just be told stories. And so the Exodus is real historical events that happened sometime in the late Bronze Age. Now, you can take out a lot of the magic and a lot of the mystery, a lot of the spirituality if you want to, but the event itself took place. The Exodus from Egypt. And no matter how it happened, if it was in segments, if it was a couple of different Exoduses, as some people say, a lot of people say there's no archaeological proof that 1 million people left Egypt, and I think it was probably a lot smaller number than that. But this view of the scholars, like Kenneth Kitchen, Manfred Bietig, James Hoffmeyer, Richard Friedman, who came closer in his book, in the Exodus, to assuming historical reality than most biblical scholars have in decades. And by assuming that the Passover and the Exodus really happened, we can begin to better understand the world of magic in which Moses lived. Remember, he was an ancient Egyptian. He was Israelite or Hebrew by blood, but he was raised in the Egyptian palaces, and I've gone through all that. My book covers that. I've talked about Senon with this guy sitting back here, this bust behind me, how I believe that he is the biblical Moses in Egypt. So it's set in real history. And but being in Egypt, think of the spirituality of Egypt. Think of how all the plagues, the 10 plagues, attacked individual spiritualities in Egypt. This is something we can start to understand once we realize that it was a real event. Passover is a holiday of magical potential. It's full of ancient stories of awe and wonder, and this was known even 2,000 years ago when we read the words of the martyr Stephen in Acts, the book of Acts 7, verse 36, concerning Moses. He was speaking to the people, and he said, "He led them out of Egypt and performed wonders and signs in Egypt, at the Red Sea, and for 40 years in the wilderness." And I believe that this idea of wonders and signs derives from the ancient practice of Egyptian magic. Now, let's examine some of these magical motifs, and let's see how they find their way into the Passover story. And I see we're almost out of time for the first segment tonight, but let's hit it, and then we'll pick it up in the second segment. Passover magic and Heka, H-E-K-A, activating the Ka. Now, if you heard Rocky's in my show a few days ago, we were talking about the Ka and the Ba, Egyptian soul. Well, magic, or Heka, was a pervasive aspect of everyone's life in ancient Egypt. It was performed since the country's earliest days by nearly everyone in Egyptian society. It was regarded as a primeval cosmic force. It was created by the gods and given to humankind, who could in turn manipulate it for their benefit. Heka meant activating the Ka, or the Ka being the spiritual force of all life. So Heka was the practice of manipulating the spiritual force of all life. And manipulation doesn't have to be a negative term. We think of it in psychological or relationship terms as being something that's very negative. Manipulating means you mold it and use it and make it work for you. So Heka, or ancient Egyptian magic, was used for nearly everything. To ward off all forms of evil, to find love, to encourage fertility, communicate with the gods, perform medicines, tests for pregnancy, curse enemies, secure an eternal afterlife, and even for good luck in business. And most importantly, practitioners of Heka would interpret dreams. And we get a direct glimpse of this practice through the tales of Joseph in Genesis. Joseph, who originally came to Egypt and was risen to great power. He was brought to Egypt because his brothers sold him into slavery. You remember the sons of Jacob, Israel, the clan of Israel. They sold him into slavery. He ends up in prison. He ends up a slave in Egypt, but he interprets dreams. And that's the direct glimpse of this practice through the tales of Joseph in the book of Genesis, who became a dream interpreter and a magician for Pharaoh. Heka was performed most potently by Pharaoh and the lector priests, the highest class of priests who could read, write, and perform words of magic, Heka'u, using scrolls, wands, staffs, and other devices such as wax figurines and copper serpents. Now, you see, I'm mentioning the staff is mentioned in there. They use these as their tools. We're going to get into
Amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, we're back. Thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid Radio Program, right here on Odyssey Radio. That's the Odyssey Radio Network at ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, come on over, if you're only listening, come on over and watch the video simulcast and join the live chat room going on right now during this show over at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And while you're there, you can look down and scroll through this nearly 300 past shows we have archived over on the YouTube channel. And so avail yourself of that and listen at your leisure. So, folks, we're talking about Moses. We're talking more specifically about the event where we know Moses from, the Great Exodus in Egyptian history and the Bible. The Exodus is something that more and more scholars are finding actually took place. Even though there's a bit of disparity on how it took place, when it took place, whether the spiritual aspects of it were true or false from the biblical narrative, the Old Testament, it's still something that's being looked at, and we're finding that the events rang true, and the things in the passage that talks about the passages that talk about the Exodus are filled, rife with Egyptian magic, Heka. And so we're looking into that. And I just ended by saying that Heka, or Hekau, Hekayu, Heku, they used scrolls and wands and staffs and other devices, these highest class of priestly magicians for the Pharaoh in Egypt in ancient times. And Passover, the earliest of the Jewish remembrances of this event, is also the one rifest with the magical qualities. Its very name, Pesach, means protection, referring to the protection that's offered by the blood of the lamb that was painted onto the doorframes of the Hebrews. When Moses commanded this strange ritual, he was ordering, in essence, a magical spell, a magical ritual. It was a perfect example of Egyptian apotropaic, can't say that face, apotropic, coming from apothecary and so on, and apotropic magic, or protection magic. One of the main functions of Heka in Egypt. It was protection magic. And so when Moses ordered this strange ritual, he was commanding the people of Israel to engage in a magical ritual, something that was very commonplace in Egyptian culture and spirituality of the day. Apotropic magic. And these rituals were conducted during precarious times like childbirth, which could be very dangerous in ancient times, death, and in the case of Passover, protecting against the plague of the death of the firstborn. Blood was often used in these Egyptian potions and rituals, and its presence on the doorframes would have served a similar kind of terrifying, protective role to that of the Gorgon in Greece, or the evil eye. We read the numerous Egyptian spells and rituals for protection, besides the classic Egyptian curses inscribed in and around Egyptian tombs. And you can find out all kinds of things about. We'll talk about that one of these days, maybe. Talk about Egyptian curses, the tomb curses, You know, if you open this tomb, the curse shall fall. And they talk about the curse of King Tut's tomb and how most of the people died very shortly after the opening of that tomb. And there's explanations, but these were also curses that were written in Egyptian magic. We read of a spell to protect a book. It states this: "As for any man who shall remove this book, carrying it off from me, their corpse shall not be buried, they shall not receive cool water, their incense shall not be inhaled, no son or daughter shall wait upon them to pour water offerings to them, their names shall not be remembered anywhere on earth, they shall not see the rays of the solar disk of Ra." And this is like, those are some of the curses you find in Egyptian magic. So Egyptologist James K. Hoffmeyer, he notes that the Hebrew word used in the Bible for magicians was hartumim, for which an Egyptian origin has long been recognized. Hartumim. That's Hartummim, hartumim. And scholars generally argue and agree that the word derives from the ancient priestly title High Tiphyri. This is all done in phonetics here. I've got it written down. HRY-TP HRY-HB. So pronounce that for me. High Heritip Hritip Hridnib. Rahib, or the chief lector priest, is what that's standing for. That word that we get, hartumim, comes from that word. And the boss of all the lector priests was this high priest, this chief lector priest, the Hightip. So, yeah, you get it. You see how the pronunciations are. Lack of vowels. So they were the most powerful priests who worked in the house of life, the Pur-Ankh, studying and transcribing ritual texts. Now, as described by Professor Scott B. Nagel in his article, The Egyptian Magicians, it bears stressing that there's nothing inherent in the title or the actions of the biblical Hartumim that suggests that they're merely charlatans engaged in sleight of hand. It's quite the contrary. The Bible portrays them as elite professionals who possess considerable abilities, even if they pale in comparison to those of Yahweh. So remember the contest where Moses pulls out the staff, turns it into a snake. Well, the magicians of Egypt do the same thing. And then the snake of Moses devours the snake of the Egyptian priests and turns back into the rod of Moses. So this is not saying the magic didn't exist or that it was fakery or charlatanism. It's saying that the biblical context was to say that the magic or the power of Yahweh, of God, was greater than the power or the magics of the Egyptian priests. Now, in the famous Westcar papyrus, it sits in the Berlin Museum, we read several stories about these chief lector priests, these magicians who worked for Pharaoh. However, none were as strong as the king himself. As Bob Breyer explains in his Ancient Egyptian Magic of 1980, one magician who could never be accused of trickery was the pharaoh. By virtue of his position, he was the most powerful of all magicians, and it was he who caused the wasters of the Nile to rise and fall, and who brought fertility to the land. Descending from the gods, the pharaoh had the greatest of magical powers. Thus it was Pharaoh whom Moses and Aaron had to directly confront if they were to convince him to let their people go, and they would need magic as potent as Pharaoh's. So, the staff of Moses, was this really an Egyptian scepter? Think of the Egyptian scepter. It was a long staff and it had the crook on the end. And was this the scepter? It also had in the, and I've just got to make mention of this in the writing of my own fictional book, which I'm working on now, The 10 Breaths of Ra. I have a scepter head that is placed on the staff. And it's like the old bird head, and you've seen it. It goes up in a straight line and has almost a straight diagonal on it instead of a curved crook on it. And that straight diagonal, which runs off in both directions, is this bird head from the earliest dynasties. Now, the staff of Moses is perhaps the greatest magical object of the Passover narrative, and it remains one of history's most interesting artifacts. Alongside the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, the sword Excalibur, and the Arthurian legends, these are the types of artifacts that have reached from history somewhere into our mystical narratives. And so it remains one of the greatest biblical artifacts. And the Bible speaks of it being used by Moses to perform these magical feats and to demonstrate the power of God. Even in, I remember, if you haven't watched it, if you've got kids, it's worth watching. Even if you don't have kids, it's worth watching. DreamWorks' animated version of the Moses story and the Exodus story, The Prince of Egypt. Very well done. It's very much the biblical story, with a few derivations from the narrative. But in that, when God is showing Moses at the burning bush, he says, you'll do this and you'll do this. And he says, and I will show you my wonders. It's the magic of Yahweh, the magic of God. And it's from this passage. And the Lord said to him, what's in your hand, Moses? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. That's Exodus chapter 4, verses 2 through 3. So it's assumed that because Moses was a shepherd at this point in his life, he was carrying a simple wooden crook. However, the first time the staff is mentioned, magic pervades the scene, for it immediately turns into a serpent. This has led some to wonder if this innocent staff was not really a lector's priest's magical wand, or even an Egyptian scepter of royalty. My question would be, why would Moses be hanging on to this? It was an Egyptian scepter of royalty. Is there something in the story we don't know? Did Moses still have this scepter of power, this staff? Did he use that? Why did he carry it with him if he's at the burning bush and he's tending sheep? Remember, he first went up to chase a sheep that had gone astray up in the rocks. And so now the Heka, the Heqa, scepter of the Pharaoh, is meant to symbolize the shepherd's crook. So the king could metaphorically shepherd his people. And it was a symbol of authority and rulership. And according to Caroline Seawright, a nearly identical word, Heka, was used to describe magic. And the scepter was also a magical implement with a long history in an ancient pre-dynastic tomb at Abydos. An ivory Heka scepter was found, and it was likely that of the king. So, I am going to show you a picture here. If you're listening, you won't get a chance to see this, but let me see if I can bring up this image for you. I'm just going to call it staff, and let me look this up here. So give me a moment while I'm browsing for this particular staff, and maybe the best place to find this is my cover design for the 10 Breaths of Ra. Let's see where that is. Let's see if I can find that image for you here. 10 Breaths. That's not the one I'm looking for. Cover art. I'm going to find this for you because I want you to see this. Here it is. All right, let me open this up. Boom. Okay. Now, this is the little self-serving maybe a bit, but this is the cover I designed for the book I am working on finishing right now, the 10 Breaths of Ra, which I hope to have done in the next few weeks here and off to my agent. The 10 Breaths of Ra. Now, you look at the main character I've illustrated on this cover, and he's holding a staff in his hand. Let me blow this up a little bit for you so you can see this a little bit better. This is the staff I was making reference to. It's the head of a bird. Some say it looked like a hare or a rabbit or something, but it's definitely a bird. Not an ibis. It was something like that, and I can't remember the name of it. But this is the kind of staff I'm making reference to. It's either the curved staff, which you've seen, looks like a shepherd's crook, and it's got the gold and blue striping that goes up and down the staff, the symbol of royal power. And this was also an older one where the headpiece was in the shape of this bird head, and it was attached to, some thought it was an antelope as well, by the way, and you can see how that can be misconstrued. But this in particular is the staff I'm referring to. All right, I'm going to turn that off. Let's get back to our narrative here. Now, Hoffmeyer noted that throughout pharaonic history, the shepherd's crook has been a regular symbol of kingly authority, and deriving from the concept that the king was the shepherd of his people. And we read in the Wisdom of Merikare, a text from 2200 BC, says, "Well nourished is mankind, God's flock, because the word for ruler, or well nourished is mankind, God's flock." That's the quote from the text from 2200 BC. The word for ruler and scepter was made the same, Heka, Heqa. Now Hoffmeyer wonders if maybe the staff of Moses presented a direct challenge to the authority of Pharaoh. When he came in with his staff and he threw it down and it turns into a snake, this was a direct challenge to the god Pharaoh and his power and his shepherding ability. And we know from Exodus that Moses was a prince in Egypt. He was raised in Pharaoh's court before he even left Egypt, so it's highly likely he would have been trained in the ways of the lector priests and possessed his own Hector scepter. Now remember in the biblical passage, as a side note, that Moses, when he encounters God in the burning bush, I can't go back to Egypt. He says, I'm wanted there. I'm a wanted man. My life would be forfeit. Pharaoh seeks my life. What was God's answer? He says, the Pharaoh that seeks your life is dead. He says, you're going to go back. Now that doesn't mean nobody recognized who Moses was. If he was indeed this guy sitting over my shoulder, Senenmut, who was a grand vizier to Hatshepsut and held 92 royal titles and was a prince in Egypt, it's very well that even in his older years there were people who remembered who he was. As a matter of fact, there's part of something I've worked on in the past, a speculative piece that I was writing about Rechmir, who was the grand vizier under Tutmosis III. Now, Tutmosis III was the son of Tutmosis II, who died leaving Hatshepsut to take over the throne because Tutmosis III was only 3 years old at the time, something like that, 3 to 6. And she took over, but when he reclaimed the throne at around age 29 or 30 after her death, Tutmosis III, it would have been the god of Egypt, and his grand vizier, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and his vizier was none other than Rechmir, a man who was the same age as Senenmut, the same age as the biblical Moses, and most probably would have been a contemporary of Moses, knowing him as he grew up in the palace, knowing him as he became Senenmut and the Grand Vizier of Egypt. He, in his older age, becomes the Grand Vizier under Tutmosis III, not his old age, his middle age, and then he takes it into his old age. So it's very interesting that Moses most likely would have been recognized, especially by the Grand Vizier, is the point I'm making, Rechmir, and that Moses most probably would have served as a threat to the rule of the sitting Pharaoh, because he was technically, legally, the son of Hatshepsut, even though not her blood son. So I hope I didn't mix you all up there. The only point I'm trying to make is that Moses, in coming back and presenting this staff, having the staff with power, was a direct assault on the power of Pharaoh as shepherding his flock. And there were people who would have recognized Moses at the same time as having been a prince in Egypt. There. Let's move off of that point. Now, this is where the magic comes in. Hoffmeyer noted that word plays between the nearly identical words for ruler and scepter, Heka with the Q and Heka with the K, that's scepter and magic, which use slightly different K sounds, the literal being more, the later being more guttural, Hecha versus Heka. And now if Moses was indeed a high-ranking prince of Egypt, recognized as the former prince, somebody who's been gone for years, and back now, and presenting this Hecha, this scepter, he would have had a magical scepter, the Hecha. Say that guttural word 3 times in a row. Through which he could perform magic, Hecha. So he had the Hecha, the Ch sound and the H are really hard to put together. But he had both elements. And if he was once a pharaoh, or somebody who was being groomed to be pharaoh, he would have had the most powerful Hecha scepter, with the most powerful Hecha magic. And this makes more sense considering in Exodus 4, verse 20, Moses' staff is called Matah Ha-Elohim. Matah Ha-Elohim, a Hebrew phrase meaning the staff of God. And this gives it divine power and bestows upon Moses special authority as God's messenger, exactly as Pharaoh's staff did for Pharaoh. So the Hecha was the same thing as the Matah Ha-Elohim. So there you go. There's a little Egyptian, a little Hebrew thrown in. So have you ever thought of that? When you see Moses with the staff, when you see Charlton Heston in the movie and the big staff, was this the staff, the Hecha? Is that what it became? Is that what it symbolized when he went back to Egypt? Was this a continued conflict between Pharaoh and Moses, saying, I'm not going to be the weak link, Moses. I will not let your people go. They're my people. I hold the Hecha. And so that's the whole thing about the staff itself. Now, there was also an ivory scepter from the Abydos tomb of Scorpion, a ruler of Upper Egypt that lived centuries before Egypt was even unified. Think of the movie with The Rock, The Scorpion King. Very fanciful, sci-fi, pseudo-historical movie. The Scorpion King was a real person. And this was before Egypt was a unified kingdom, and before the dynastic days. And even in those early times, the Hecha scepter was a powerful tool of the king, and remained so until the Roman times. And so, some of these discoveries show you, you know what, I do want to, I would like to show you this scepter, this ancient one that was found. Let me see where that just went, right here. Now, if I'm going to save this image, I'm going to call this up, and I want to show you the similarities between the one I just showed you and the one we have here. Now, this is the, let me import this, and I didn't do this ahead of time. This is all off the seat of my pants. But let's get this image in here and show you this ancient one that was found from the days of the Scorpion King. I'm going to add an image. Whoops, not a slideshow. Technical things we're doing here right now. Let me find this image of the Hecha from the days of the Scorpion King. And that's going to be here, and let me find it where it went. Right there. Boom. Okay, this is the ancient Hecha that was found in the tombs of the Scorpion King. And you can see this is made out of ivory, and how it's worn literally over the millennia, 4,000 plus years. But this would be the staff that was owned by the Scorpion King, to show that he was the possessor of the Hecha, the magic, and the holder of the Hecha, the scepter of power. So there you go. Those of you watching on the video, you have that opportunity to view this. And folks, if you're just listening and you want to see this, you can come over to the YouTube channel and look at this show when it's archived, and you can find this. So that was the Hecha. And now let's move on. Let's look at snakes and crocodiles. Snakes in relation to the Hecha that Moses had. In Exodus 7:10 through 11, we read, So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and did what the Lord had commanded them to do. Aaron threw the staff in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called for the wise men, his magicians, and sorcerers, and they, along with the Egyptian magicians, did the same thing with their secret arts. Now, curiously, the Hebrew word for serpent, which we've heard before in other things, talking about the Nephilim, Genesis chapter 3, the Garden of Eden, nachash, is not used here, but rather the word tannin, which translates as crocodile. Now, did they throw down staves and they turned into nakash, which is serpents? Or did they turn into, as the biblical word states it in the Hebrew, crocodile, tannin? So when Moses' staff first turns into a serpent, the correct Hebrew word, nakash, is not used. However, when they're finally before Pharaoh, the staff turns into a crocodile, a tannin. Now that's in the language, in the linguistics. Now that kind of changes the story, doesn't it? So eventually Pharaoh's chief lector priests duplicate the magic act by turning their own staves into 2 more tannin, or crocodiles, only to watch in horror as Aaron and Moses' crocodile consumes its Egyptian counterparts, proving the authority of the Israelites and their Lord, at least in the context of that story. Moses, having Hekah, possessing the Hekah, throws it on the ground, and his brother Aaron does it for him as representative. It turns into a tannin, not a nakash, not a serpent, a tannin, a crocodile. Pharaoh's priests, Pharaoh, the possessor of Hekah, Egyptian magic, the holder of the Hekah, the Egyptian staff. They throw the staves down, they turn into tannin, crocodiles, and then Moses' crocodile eats those 2 crocodiles and bam, turns back into a staff. So the idea of consuming something to gain its power dates back to the pyramid texts, a millennium before the Passover took place. So we're looking at about 2500 BCE. And in the pyramid of King Unas, 5th dynasty, 2350 BC, we read, Unas eats their magic and swallows their spirits. Nagel explains this. In Egyptian magical parlance, to swallow something is to know something, and to know someone is to have power over that person. And there's a whole thing we talked about, knowing the secret or private name of God. Remember Moses at the burning bush. He leans into God and he says, so, okay, all this stuff I have to do. Whom shall I say sent me? What's your name? He's asking for the private name of God. And God said, it's none of your business what my name is. You tell them I am sent you. I am that I am. And we got a whole thing on that as well. But getting back to the magic, the eating of the words, the knowing the private language, knowing the secret names, the power of turning an inanimate object into a living crocodile is similarly very old. Crocodiles were a very common element of the ancient Egyptian myth, best personified by Sobek, the god Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of the crocodiles and the Nile waters. And he was called Lord of the Waters, and even featured in the Book of the Dead. So if the deceased wanted to turn into Sobek, they would have to recite, I am the crocodile who is terrifying. I am the crocodile god. I bring destruction. And they were also important to the lector priests who admired their raw, primeval powers. And so in the story of one lector priest, Ubeneir, from the Westcar Papyrus, we read of the wife of Ubeneir, who is seeing another man behind his back. Ubeneir decides to do something about it, so he fashions a wax crocodile, 7 fingers long, casts it into a pool near the other man, and it immediately grows to 7 cubits in length, and it consumes the other man. So, fortunately, Ubeneir acquiesces to the king's demand to reverse the magic, and after 7 days, he performs another incantation that opens the crocodile's mouth and frees the man. So listen to the Egyptians describe what happened next. Ubeneir bent down, and he caught it, and it became a crocodile of wax again in his hand. Now compare this to the verse from Exodus 4:4. describing what happens when Moses' staff turns into a serpent. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into the staff in his hand. This is Hekar. This is Egyptian magic. And there's so much more to talk about this. But we're out of time. Folks, we're going to continue this tomorrow. I hope you found this interesting and intriguing. We're going to talk more about the Magicks of the Exodus and the Magicks of Moses and how the Magicks of Egypt